My name is Jeanette Tesmer, and I'm the executive director at the Gateway Regional Arts Center in Mount Sterling. And we are with Mr. Grayson in his room. So give us a wave. And he's with his students. Give us a wave. Yeah, they're good. As well as we may have a few community members pop in as they were invited to be a part of this as well. So we'll see what happens in a chat. And if anybody has any questions along the line, want to say something or ask a question, we'll just raise hands. But I'm going to introduce our two filmmakers, which is really exciting that they get to be in the same place at the same time together, especially during a pandemic. So I don't know if you're sick of each other yet or not, or if you are happy to be there in the same room together.
We're fine. At least we're not snowed in. We can actually walk outside and there's sun. Not to make you guys feel bad that you're not in California, but
so we've have
gotten
Larissa.
Plenty of sun ourselves here. It's okay.
Yes, we got some today, which is great. And I'm like in like some weird like sunscape here.
Closet.
Yes.
Like a closet.
So Larissa Lamb and Baldwin Chiu, thank you so much for being here with us in Kentucky. So welcome to Kentucky. We feel like you're here with us. I was just gonna, instead of reading your bios, which everybody can go and find and we have on our website, I wanted you both to tell us something that you've done creatively in this quarantine lockdown. And tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure.
I guess we'll start with saying that we are married.
We're not violating.
We're not violating.
No rules.
Same household.
Yeah,
so.
We're breathing the same air. One of the creative things is we did a music video called Asian Americans Make History. That was kind of creative. We did that in our apartment. Just us and a green screen and computers and a camera and a tripod.
Yeah, and it was a spoof on the Hamilton song, the Schuyler Sisters. And instead of going through American history, we went through specifically all the things about Asian American history that people didn't know. And we did that for Asian Pacific Heritage Month last year. So that's on YouTube. Another fun video. So this is my answer. Now that was your answer.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you guys are Star Wars fans, but we, both these videos. Yes. Okay. Mr. Grayson says he is. At the beginning of the pandemic, we made this like PSA about wearing masks. And when they started mandating or not mandating, recommending it, we thought it'd be funny. Actually, it was Baldwin's idea. Like, hey, what if like Darth Vader already has a mask? And so we did this PSA where Darth Vader is like the enforcer for like masks. And I show up at the door because he's ordered takeout. So, and he's just like chastising me for not wearing a mask. So that's on YouTube too. So we kind of had a little fun.
What was it called? It's called like
it was just mask PSA COVID-19.
Yeah.
But we can forward it to you guys too later on. And if you guys want to check those out, those are just kind of fun things we did under quarantine. Yeah. Sadly, we didn't think like that video would still be relevant today, but apparently, it
now
is.
They're saying double masks, right? So I need to get a
double Darth Vader.
I need to put the Spaceballs Darth Vader mask on top of the regular Darth Vader mask.
Even bigger.
So we can be double
dark
mask.
helmet. And some of these students probably
they were like, who is
Spaceballs? Like if you like Star Wars, you need to check out Spaceballs.
Watch Spaceballs.
Yeah.
I think not to like plug any sites, but I'm pretty sure it's streaming on probably every platform.
Right. Although I would say some of the jokes today, like in a 2021 lens, may be a little bit un-PC. So word of warning.
Take it with a grain of salt. It's the same creators as it was a Mel Brooks, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was Mel Brooks.
Blazing Saddles.
I think he had mellowed a little bit from Blazing Saddles, possibly by the time he did Spaceballs. But
yeah. Anyways, but we're here to talk.
We're sure students are following Mel Brooks.
Yeah,
also.
we're music we're music artists. We worked in the music industry, or I still work in the music industry for like a long time, and have been a TV and radio host as well. You've been an engineer, still engineer, mechanical engineer, raps about engineering,
hip hop artist, beatboxer.
And then we became documentary filmmakers, which is what led us to be here with you today.
Yeah, so that leads me to my very first question, which is, you both have interesting backgrounds. And also, I just want to note that you are the classic, like, you can go to college for something practical and then also follow a creative sphere and make a living out of it and all of those things too, because I too went to business school. So here
There
we
you
go.
go.
Of how you got into filmmaking, what led you to it and why film and not another, outlet.
Medium.
Yeah, well, I mean, I have you're mentioning, business. I have a business economics degree from UCLA, go Bruins, and initially I actually knew I was going to be going into the music industry, but it's a business. I mean, I think whatever you do creatively, it's still a business. I mean, even if you're going to be a doctor, even as teachers, even though you're getting a paycheck, you still need to kind of learn to manage your own business as like a teacher, and like your household is almost like a business. And so I think that's one of the things that in learning to be creative, it's also to be mindful that you are your own business. But that doesn't completely answer your question. So Baldwin, how did you get into filmmaking? You took some crazy vacation with your family to Mississippi, right?
Yeah, I mean, similar. Like, I went to engineering school, but I've always had a heart and passion for the entertainment field, especially with hip hop music and stuff like that. Yeah, I mean, it goes to say that, if you have a career in something else, it doesn't mean you can't also do other things. There's no reason why you can't be doing something creative at the same time that you're doing something else. And actually, I think the engineering job prepared me, even though I've always been an advocate and I've had a passion for entertainment. It was engineering, the details of engineering, project management that allows me to now be a producer in film. I understand I mean, basically when you're making a movie, you're project managing a movie. So a producer is basically a project manager, except now you're managing a film production. And so, when we went to Mississippi for the first time, I actually was not planning to project manage or produce a movie. I was thinking about just going to find my family roots, documenting it for some home video archive that we might watch in 10 to 15 years with my daughter again. And we thought that would be it. Larissa, on the other hand,
I got the bright idea that
she was like,
it's weird because my background's in music, but I had written and directed plays in the past, and I've done produced television in the past, and so this was really my first foray into film. And I think the way the events unfolded, we did a short film first called Finding Cleveland that was 14 minutes. Part of that film, some of the story is embedded in Far East Deep South, but we had such an amazing response to that short film that people wanted to know more. We wanted to know more about Baldwin's family history and also just the history of the Chinese in the South that most people don't talk about. And I also think, in light of recent events with COVID and a lot of people, mistakenly blaming the Asian community for the coronavirus and not understanding the difference between, somebody who is, in China is not affiliated with somebody that's Asian American,
Right.
It's just like some of you might have German descent, but you're not responsible for World War II and Nazi, Germany, right? And or if you have Russian descent, like you're not responsible for hacking computers in the United States. I mean, there's a lot of things that I think as a community in this country that we just have implicit bias, and we don't distinguish between somebody who's Asian here
Asian American
and Asian American, or even like what generation you're born. I mean, there's a big difference than somebody who's a brand new immigrant coming, whether it's from Europe, from Africa, from South America, than somebody who's been here for generations. And unfortunately, because our somebody that looks like us, that's of Asian descent, normally the default is, oh, you must not be from here, you must speak another language, and we start the movie with Baldwin saying like, people ask me where I'm from, and
they always say,
where are you really
from?
And we get that question a lot, but
like,
then we
still San Francisco.
It's still San Francisco. And we turn it on its head because we go like, well, he actually didn't know growing up. He didn't know anything about his father's family. And so I just really felt like the film needed to be told from this idea that like, what does it mean to be American? Because when I found out that there were like Asians in the South, I was like, what? We didn't learn this in history. And it's like, we learned about segregation. We learned about Reconstruction. Like, I didn't remember reading anything about anybody being Asian there, because, all I thought was like, oh, Asians, Chinese were working on the railroads and they were in the mines, and then they were incarcerated. Japanese were incarcerated during World War II. Like, that's the extent of Asians in American history. But when I discovered this history, that there was this strong connection to existing American history, then I was like, wait a second, how come we don't know this? And, you know, more people need to know about this, because one, I think it informs our identity. Like, I feel a stronger ownership, like, in this country, because, you know, I'm like, I understand, like, my people had to go through stuff. They've been here a long time. They've contributed a lot. And I didn't have that perspective before. And also, I hope, like, other people that are not Asian view us as belonging more, like, oh yeah, we've been part of the American story, the American history for a long time, and not just dropping in and out. And so that was a huge motivation in making in the film.
So Baldwin, you went down totally innocent in filming this, you know, with your father and your family and the discovery. Larissa, it sounds like in your head the whole time you're like, this is something else. This is something else. When did that happen of like, let's actually start looking at some other, you know, options of where this goes and what information to include and how to include it? Was that completely after your discovery in Mississippi, or did that happen kind of fluidly while you were there, like in your hotel room away from your family, and you're like, let's make a documentary? You know?
No, I mean, I think it was
a combination of a lot of things.
Yeah.
I think it started in Mississippi. I think you said as soon as you walked into the museum and you discovered, what the heck is a museum about Chinese people doing in Mississippi?
The wheels started turning, but then when we, and I know some of the students here haven't seen the film, without spoiling too much, we find some important things through
Hopefully you guys still have access to it, right?
Yeah, like we find some really important, it's like a mystery, like we find all these really important things. And so when we started finding these important things, so there's like the personal story, like, oh my gosh, like that in and of itself is like kind of crazy. Like it's like you're like, what? Like we find these things that belong to his grandfather, and like you know, that just doesn't happen out of nowhere in one day. And then the history of it.
And then we started touring with the short film. And as we were touring with the short film, Finding Cleveland, it was only 14 minutes, less than 14 minutes long. We started discovering more information, and people started asking us more questions, and things just kept opening up. People started coming out, and you'll see it in the film where people just started coming out and say like, hey, we know your past. We know about your grandfather that you've never known about. And then those opened up more stories. And I think as that continued, we started collecting more and more information. And eventually we're like, this needs to be more than just a short documentary. You know, this can easily expand to a featured film with everything that we've discovered.
Yeah, and then we took a trip to the National Archives in San Francisco, which held the immigration documents from the Chinese exclusion activist family, which we didn't even know about when we were in Mississippi. And that broke open a whole new side of the story, which we actually had to change our film in a lot of ways, because, you know, we thought it was just, oh, this is just about Chinese in Mississippi. And that was it. But the film is so much more. It's what it means to be American, and, you know, the lineage in this country for the Asian community.
And then even just the intersection between the Black and the Chinese community, it's something that we didn't have in our short film. We just knew that, yeah, they, you know, the Chinese lived in the Black community, but we didn't really know anything else other than that. We knew some of the history stuff from the Chinese, previous Chinese grocery store owners and existing store owners that told us stories, but we didn't really know from their perspective what that relationship was. And we found that out during that journey, and we really want, and we do include that in our film as well.
So I'm going to ask you just a couple of questions about filmmaking in general, because as being an art center, we've talked about this a little bit before, that I think film is such an easy access to other cultures, religions, ethnicities, traditions, as well as just visual, and because you can get so much more from it, and it's like reading a book almost. So thinking about like artistic direction, were you thinking about, you know, B-roll shots? Were you just kind of in the car taking, you know, trying to just soak it all in? Were you thinking about, you have some like really nice elements of illustrations that kind of come into it, some digital aspects to it. So thinking about like the film as an art form first, before we really jump into some questions I have about story and your family and some other things.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the first trip we weren't thinking about B-roll because it's what they call cinema verite. You know,
In the
it's the
moment.
real,
You're in it. Yeah.
we were in it. It's what's really happening that you're capturing. When we went back to subsequently film, you know, that's when we had the film crew and we could get some of those B-roll shots. And they say, you know, in filmmaking, like, you can never get too much B-roll. And there's a lot of truth to that, because there's a lot of times where I had to go find more B-roll. And in some cases, we did have to use some stock photography and, you know, video to kind of fill in some gaps, because there's, especially when you have people talking, you know, looking at somebody talking or a series of people talking heads is really boring. So from an artistic standpoint, you do want to fill that.
Unless you are in a Q&A on our Facebook page,
right?
That is
exactly.
riveting.
Right, it's absolutely riveting. Or if it's
Yeah.
like a celebrity and they
Just
look
kidding.
so pretty,
Yes.
and you know, you're just staring at them, or you know, fascinated. But you know, generally when you've got people talking, you want to give them a sense of the visuals, especially we have the historical elements. So like, you want to give a sense of the history, and even from an artistic standpoint, like discrimination, I think is, you know, in my mind today, I mean, I know there's been a lot of talk about, you know, racism and discrimination in this past year, but at the same time, you know, we are living in different times. So there is that perspective. It's like, it's not as bad as it was in Jim Crow, you know? I mean, if I had to choose living today or living back, you know, then I would say I would want to live today, you know. And so I wanted to also give a sense of how heinous some of those discriminatory things were against the Chinese, because I think we hear a lot more about it from about the Black community, you know, lynchings, etc., you know, all those things. But to see these like really racist cartoons, I mean, I found so many of them. Like, those are things I wanted to include, you know, not just for shock value's sake, but just to show that, you know, it
was part of the American narrative at that time.
And you want to shock people into like wanting to make change in some ways. So that was important. And of course, you know, showing our daughter, she's so cute. That's just one way to get people to just smile, is inserting our child every once in a while.
Are your students all art students? Are they all in the class? Do they know what B-roll
no,
is?
So this is actually an English 2 class. This is a sophomore English class.
Okay.
So the things that we look at a lot of, we're looking at paragraph writing. We're looking at building toward essay writing and things like this. And so one of the things that I always think is very interesting when we get filmmakers in to talk with students is how is the process of composition similar, and this is a little bit, I think, of what Jeanette was getting at. You know, you've got to sort of find the story in all those mountains of B-roll and in your primary photography as well. And I'd love to hear you guys talk about your process of doing that and figuring out what's the narrative, what's the through line.
That is very hard. I mean, if you're writing a script, because obviously you guys are writing an English class, you can come up with a beginning, a middle, and an end. You know, it may change, you may go through some different drafts, but you are writing it to the page, you're creating it. You know, from a documentary filmmaker's standpoint,
changed a lot.
We were getting footage and then having pieced together. It was reverse. We had to piece together a film. You know, it's just like if somebody gave you a bunch of words, you know, and a bunch of pages, and you're like, put a book together. Like, I mean, that's pretty much what documentary filmmaking is about. But at the same time, a lot of the same principles that you have in good storytelling, character is very, very important. Even more so in documentary. You know, a lot of times people think it's just like facts and figures. And there are some documentaries that are more topic oriented, that are more facts and figures. You know, I think to make a compelling film and compelling documentary, character is very important. You want your subject, and when we talk about character, you know, it's the person or people you are following. And thankfully, Baldwin's dad was apparently very compelling, because we ended up having to put more of him in it.
And we actually didn't think that in the beginning.
No, and originally we were actually going to follow more Baldwin, because he was the one I had easy access to, because obviously he's part of the process. He's here. I didn't have a whole lot of access to his dad besides the first trip that we went, and I had to kind of work my way around trying to get more access to him, because he's a very closed and private person, doesn't really want to talk about everything. You know, the older generation, they're just kind of like that. And so for us, we did a lot of drafts, just like in writing. Like, we put together a lot of different versions, and we showed it to people.
You have
you know
rough drafts and we have rough cuts.
Yeah, and it's so great to like get feedback from people. If you're writing a paper, like get feedback from parent, brother, sister, friend. And it was so valuable because sometimes when you're composing something, even on film, you because you know the answer, like you forget that somebody in the audience may not know that answer. And so like if we put something in the film, like we had to define it. I mean, there were some things we just didn't have time to like define everything. So like we introduced bound feet. We have his Baldwin's dad mentioning a little bit. It was an old practice that women, it was made it hard for women to walk around. These are things that will be in our study guide when we're developing that right now, where we'll give a bit greater definition and have people explore like the practice of bounding feet of women in China, like in the early in the 1800s, like and earlier, had to like wrap their feet so that they wouldn't get big, and it was kind of a sign of beauty and a sign of a class, and there was all sorts of other meaning to it, but it was just kind of hard to get into all of it. But we did have to define it at least a little bit. Or even the Chinese Exclusion Act. We introduced the Chinese Exclusion Act. Now we have to define it for people. And there was a lot of other concepts and things that we had in earlier versions where we mentioned it and we had to take it out because we didn't have time to define it. And just character arc. There's a beginning. Like, what's the character development? Like Baldwin and his dad had conflict generationally, culturally. We wanted to show that at the beginning. His dad was kind of didn't want to really, I kind of painted him to be like the reluctant passenger on this trip, where Baldwin and his brother were like, come on, let's go, Dad. And you want that antagonist in good storytelling. And so I created an antagonist in his father at the beginning of the film. And then they go on this journey. It's like a buddy, it's like, you think about you always reference other things like books or films. And so like this was kind of like a buddy road trip in my mind, between the brothers and him, and they're going on this buddy road trip, and it's this coming of age, that's like always a trope, but like this revelation, and they grow together in the relationship. So by the end of the movie, they have a stronger relationship. They have a better understanding of each other. Maybe things aren't perfect, but there is kind of this place where they've arrived, where they're in a different place than when they started. And so character arc, story arc, those are all things I put into play. Antagonist, protagonist, in the film, which you normally wouldn't think would happen in a documentary, but those are things that are, and hopefully when people watch it, they're not thinking about those things. But if you start and you stop and you analyze the elements, you realize like those lines are there, and they were very intentional.
Mm-hmm. I think it's interesting, Baldwin, first of all, that your brother got to be a part of this experience too. And I would be interested to hear a little bit about your comfort level of telling your family that you're going to be a part of this documentary series that a lot of people are going to see, and how they felt about it, of being your brother seems very outgoing, so seemed to not care too much, but your mom was the one that said, let's take this trip, it's our anniversary, I want to do something about, how it feels to be the subject matter of something, instead of videotaping other people, it's totally turned back on you, and how that felt, and how you maybe gave control to Larissa, or maybe were a little pushed back on some reactionaries or whatever that was, especially because it's your partner, and not only just in a film but also in life. So that I just wonder how that all kind of came to play.
Yeah, there was a lot of flux in all that, a lot of changes. I wasn't sure how, because even though my brother is pretty outgoing, he's on Facebook, you see him all that, but then he doesn't, he's busy, he's got his own life, and this wasn't necessarily his project, but it is his family. So it was important to him in that sense. But it was, we had to just really work on finding time to make it convenient for us to be able to get his story. My dad was probably the harder one to do, just because even though we actually see him more than my brother, and my brother's pretty local to here, my dad just is even more hesitant to talk about things, and you saw that more in the beginning of the film. Towards the end, he got more open, and now today he's more open, but it's because we're already done with the film. But in that process, it was really hard. In fact, the interviews that we got from him, I was not there. Larissa kicked me out because we knew that the history of my family is that my dad won't talk to us about stuff because he just, and you saw a little bit of that in the film, how he just assumes that since we're just his kids, we're just a couple of little, it doesn't matter that we're both married and with kids now. It doesn't matter.
You're
about
always your
adults.
parents' kids.
We're just
like,
the kid that knows nothing.
they never
right?
take you seriously.
And maybe you students know that too, right? No matter how smart you guys are, right? Your parents
gonna be parents.
Parents just don't understand. You guys don't know that song either, probably. Parents don't understand. But you gotta look up
Will Smith.
Will Smith.
Or I guess it'd be Fresh Prince.
Fresh Prince.
Yeah, parents just don't understand. So yeah, so Larissa was the one that was able to break my father a little bit, break him in and talk. And I was, all those interviews of my dad, I was not there, and I actually didn't know anything about what he said until we got back to LA and I reviewed all the footage.
Well, and they also say in filmmaking, you know, keep the camera rolling, especially in documentary filmmaking. And so I'm very glad I kept the camera rolling, because there were some times when I was interviewing Charles, Baldwin's dad, and he started to like break down crying, like recounting the past and how painful some of these memories were. And he'd be like, I don't think I can go on, but I kept the camera rolling, you know, and lo and behold, a few minutes later, he started talking again. And I almost feel like it was therapy for him. Like this was his time. Like he had locked up some of these stories like for his whole life. Like when Baldwin saw some of this footage, he's like, I've never heard that in my life. And even some stories his mom didn't even know about. And so it was very therapeutic, I think, for him to talk about some of these things. And it's weird. It's like, I think he wants to talk about it, but then he doesn't want to talk about it because it's so personal. And even now, like we just saw him last week and he has mixed feelings. Like there's a line in a movie where I ask him about how does it feel to come back to Mississippi and, you know, be at your father's, you know, where your father used to be. And he's like, I have mixed feelings. And I think that really encompasses him as a person. Because even to this day, like, you know, we're going to be broadcasting on PBS, a slightly shorter version than the one you guys get to see, but that's happening in May, and I think it's starting to freak him out a little bit like that. I don't think it's like computated in his head like how many people have already watched the film and are going to be watching the film, but he understands the historical value of it. But I think the personal side, if he had his way, he'd just be completely out of the movie.
Yeah, but it's so central. I mean, even those reactions, I have worked in my past, I've worked in museums and have had individuals come in and view things from a family collection that they haven't seen in a very long time, to, you know, working with people that are bringing in something that is historic to their family, to seeing it in a case, you know, is even more touching. You know, his reaction, and then to finding, this is not a secret, to finding your great grandfather's Bible in just like a box pulled off of an archival shelf, you know, and that just pure reaction of it, and thinking about, you know, his reaction to your reaction, Baldwin, to Larissa, like, you know, this kind of trickle down effect of it. It was just such a beautiful moment that got captured that was so spontaneous, I'm sure. I mean, no one knew that was there, right? Besides the archivist.
Right? That was not staged at all. I mean, you know, in fact,
you saw it the way we saw it. In fact, actually, you saw it the way she did not see it, because Larissa
wasn't in the room.
She wasn't in the room. She was. Yeah, I was filming and Larissa was.
My daughter was really young. She was only like a little over a year old, and so like if you pay attention, you can hear her crying a little bit outside
the room.
I'm with her outside, so I was not.
I missed a moment.
Yeah, so I mean, that's part of as the filmmaker, I wanted to take the audience on that journey with us through our eyes, you know, and in some sense, obviously, because I'm the director, like through my eyes, like I'm discovering this the first time, you know, I want the audience to feel the same way, the way I was like, what, you guys found a Bible? What the heck? You know, and like the emotion of all of it and the discovery of both, not just the artifacts and the people that we encounter, but even just the history and going like and reacting to it, you know?
And it was a Chinese Bible. It wasn't just like your, you know, placed by the Gideons, you know, that was in the hotel room, right? It was a Chinese Bible in the heart of the South, in the Mississippi Delta, stashed in a museum.
It's so It's so interesting to me too that so I'm going to kind of fast forward through into the film that Pace, right?
Pace, Mississippi. Yeah.
Mississippi.
Has this relatively large, or had a relatively large population of Chinese immigrants.
Well,
Right?
and I would say like Pace is a very small town. I mean, you guess if you see the film, like it's like a one street town.
Yeah.
And so percentage wise, I mean, they said they had
There was
like
four stores, so there was four
Chinese
families,
family stores,
but it was all on the main block.
On the main block, because a lot of people that shopped in Pace didn't live in Pace. And then the greater area, like the Cleveland, Mississippi area, and the Mississippi Delta had way more. I mean, every little town along the Delta, there was a Chinese grocery store. And so,
but it's amazing that there was 4 of them in a row.
In a row.
No one was related to each other, correct? They weren't
not by blood.
No. The ones like each store, like they were related to each other. But yeah, the four different stores, I believe were owned by different families. Yeah. And I guess they specialized, what we were told, like, they were specialized in slightly different things. So like his grandfather's store was like fancy meats. That was fancy
whatever
meats
fancy was back
groceries.
then, right?
I don't know what fancy meats and what are non-fancy meats, but
sardines in a can as opposed to
fresh meat. There's a giant cow in the back that they're hacking. I don't know. So that's what we were told. Like each one kind of specialized a little bit differently, than the others, but they all kind of, some of them had sundries and like farming equipment and knee pads and. It was just kind of a fascinating kind of stroll down memory lane to discover that.
I'm just thinking of the community that I grew up in, the community that is here in Mount Sterling, of what that could support, and be able to have people that would come and shop in these 4 different places, and as well as obviously other, grocery stores and shops and things too, of just, that that was mind blowing to me. It was like, oh, there's 4 of these in a row, which is so crazy. So thinking about, and we talked a little bit about this when I first got to talk to you guys a couple of weeks ago, thinking about, taking the town of Pace and your connection with it to here in our community. And also we're right on the edge of Appalachia, that kind of Southern way of life of going to the grocery store, knowing your neighbors, you sit there, you talk to them, you have lunch, that you all found was something that was very kind of important to your family and your family's history, and just that whole discovery of the store and what that meant to the family and to that community as well.
Yeah, I'm guessing you're leading to the story of how in the store they extended credit to the Black community, and how it was like a place where sometimes people just hang out at the store, like one of the customers, like Happy M. He would just sit there and just wait until his dad picks him up. It was kind of like a community area where, like, yeah, it's a grocery store, but then you can eat a hot dog.
Really red hot dogs.
You have the old, the white community, the Black community, and the Chinese community would all come into the store and just grab food. And sometimes they'd sit there and eat a hot dog. Sometimes they'd order Chinese food. And I think the main thing was, it was about the whole sharecropping thing, how the Chinese grocery store was important to the Black community because they were able to extend credit. They had the food there, but if somebody that was a farmer came into town and said, like, hey, we need this and that, but we don't have money, there was a relationship there to where they knew each other enough to where they can just like sign their name in a book, tell him how much they owed him, and they would just trust them to come back when they get paid after their crops came up, and they would come back and they'd pay it off. And it was good to hear the Black community say, like, yeah, we always paid our debt. My mom, my grandpa, they always went back, and if they didn't extend credit, our family wouldn't have survived, but they knew that they could trust us to pay them. And that was a very interesting story for us to find out.
Yeah, and I think sometimes, like with the smaller towns, what we've come to realize is there is that one-on-one relationship, and you do get to know somebody's name because you see them all the time. Whereas, we live in the city, we live in Los Angeles, and you see the national news and a lot of the racial tensions and things that are flaring up. are happening in major cities. It's not happening in the small towns. So like sometimes people, you know, if we had been there in person in Kentucky, I'm sure we would have gotten questions from people back here like, what was it like to go to Kentucky? How did they treat you? And I'm sure if we had been there in person, you guys would have treated us really warmly and nicely. Just like when we were in Mississippi, people always ask us like, what was it like? Because they think like they're just going to like string us up on a noose like or something because we're different, because that's what city folks think of people in the South, right? Like,
Yeah.
and I said like, you know what? You know, we've actually had more incidents of racial tension here in the city than we've had in some of the smaller towns, because yes, maybe people have said some insensitive things, you know, just out of that not knowing, but like, you know, we don't feel hostility, you know, and when we're going to a new place in a smaller town. And just like in the back in the days, like, you know, even historically, most of the racial tension, and we're talking about the Chinese Exclusion Act, it was happening in California, even though it was a national law against Chinese. But it was because there was a lot of Chinese in California and in the coast, Seattle, all those other places. Like that was where the anger was stirred up. Whereas in Mississippi, they were Chinese were the neighbors, you know. And so the Black community and the white community, over time, I mean, initially they were looked down upon, but over time, as people got to know the community, they became friends, you know. And I think that's the difference. And today, I think we can take that lesson: know your neighbor, get to know. I mean, it's hard in a pandemic, like you're supposed to socially distance, but and I think that's why people are meaner now too. Like we're just socially distancing, ignoring each other.
Nobody's knowing each other.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know. I have to say that my neighborhood that I live in, we've become more of a front porch community than a back porch community in the pandemic, because everybody's locked in and they couldn't, you know, they're just so star crazy that we started shouting at neighbors across the street and be like, how's it going? You know, I don't know you. I've lived on the street for 10 years. And, you know, so that's, I mean, I've almost experienced the opposite of like truly getting to know your neighbor, because you don't have anybody else around you and you're kind of just stuck
other
there.
than your neighbors.
So,
yeah,
you know, like,
I guess we've done that too. Yeah.
Here in the school, I think we've been a lot more, there's been a lot more excitement about being back in the building, even in kind of a limited capacity. You know, it's like, oh, wow, I actually get to go to school. I get to go to class. One of the things we were really surprised about through the fall was that instances like discipline issues and things like this were way, way down, because everyone's afraid to screw it up. Everyone's afraid that if we get too far out of line, we may screw it up for everyone else. And so we're kind of on our toes a little bit. And so I guess trying to take a little bit better care of each other.
Yeah, I mean, we hope that's the case. I mean, I know our daughter's school had issues of bullying prior to the pandemic. They're trying to ready a return in March. We'll see if that happens or not. But, you know, hopefully, hopefully we'll see what happens.
Yeah. I mean, we do unfortunately have that thing going on where a lot of Asian parents are afraid to send their kids back to school because of what's going on right now. And so definitely, you know, we hope the schools can, I think that's what's important about our film is, you know, we want people to have a better understanding of the history of this country and how our place in this country is normal. We want to normalize a story of the early Asians in America, which leads to, you know, Asians in America for a long time and being a part of American society, American culture, and that we don't get looked upon as something different or the cause of something that you know people might say is negative.
And I think even if you're not Asian, you know, I think you know, most people have felt that sense of being an outsider at one point in time, you know, of not belonging. And so I think there's a thread in that where, you know, we all want to feel like we belong. And so there's that common thread, and that's what we're looking at, is like, you don't have to be Asian to appreciate our film. You know, whether it's a father-son relationship, whether it's feeling like the outsider, whether it's feeling, you know, sense of you know, being discriminated against. I mean, like there's a lot of threads in our film that I think different people will gravitate towards.
Yeah, you just took some words straight out of my mouth of this film is not just solely, and that's what we've kind of beautifully found through this whole film series and us supporting it, is that, you know, maybe the film is about a Chinese American family finding their roots, but what is it actually really about? And not just thinking about your story, but how, you know, when I'm introspective, how does it connect to my story as being here and being a part? So you said that far more eloquently, I think, than I had it on my sheet of paper here. So I'm thinking about how your father, Baldwin, and you kind of touched on this a little bit, Larissa, gets very emotional about the disconnect that he felt from his father and not being able to have that bond. And yet once he kind of became a father, kind of also was a little disconnected still. Has this process opened up for more family stories, more connections, more even like intimacy between you two of sharing and kind of speaking more openly or candidly with each other? Because there's nothing more like touching than watching your father break down about his not knowing his father. And but also like that feeling of like, I now know some more,
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the other things that has that we didn't expect, or at least I didn't expect to hit home so much to everybody else, because um, it's unfortunate that there's a lot of people in America. It doesn't matter what ethnic group or what society or what social economic group you come from. A lot of kids don't have fathers around
Mhm.
for whatever reason, and my dad is one of them. And I think it was one of those things where I think it did affect him because he didn't know how to model being a good father. He knew he wanted to be a father, but he didn't know how to be a father because, um, and for him, the only example he had was when he went to the military and went to
Right,
church and
right.
learned about God being a heavenly father. But that was, I mean, I guess if there's any role model we'd want, that should be our role model, right?
Yeah.
But he, but realistically, he didn't have a human role model, right? That was here to say, do this, do that, don't do this, don't do that. So so I think what that ended up doing really was more for us, because for by the time we finished this research, this, and finished this story, my dad's still old, he's now 82. um he's known how to live without a father for his entire life.
Mhm.
What I think it did was it helped me understand some of those generational issues that we've had, to better understand why he did these things, to not maybe hold such a grudge against him for not knowing what to do.
Mhm.
Or having certain attitudes about
Yeah,
things.
and
Like you
having
just
a better
because I mean,
understanding.
this film really was a window into his mind.
Mhm.
And you understand why he says the things he says or makes the decisions that he's made, in light of his history.
Yeah, and I
Mhm.
hope that what it does is it helps everyone, even if you did grow up with a family, there's still going to be a generational gap. There's going to be something different between us and our parents, us and our grandparents, that separates us. And I hope what the film does is say, hey, even though there is a separation, it doesn't mean that we can't still communicate. It doesn't mean we can't be
Mhm.
open with each other. We may not understand each other, but as long as if we can still at least be open to each other, then maybe we can at least understand why we do or say or think certain ways.
Right.
And we may not do those things ourselves, but at least we can better understand the other person's mindset. And I
Yeah.
think that hopefully transcends, anything that's racial. It transcends all race. It's
Yeah, I
just
mean, it's
human.
family dynamics too. So it's not only are you talking about, race dynamics, but you're talking about family dynamics within the film as well, which, you know, is one of those just like overarching undertones throughout the whole thing of being able to, even you and your brother communicating with each other, and your mother and your daughter, extended family, it's just that one of those like beautiful kind of underarching that you probably had no idea you were really doing until it was done, telling the story.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting to just kind of have this revelation, I think, that parents are people too. Yeah, parents have feelings too.
Yeah.
Sometimes, like, you don't think of them that way, and I think this was a great illustration of it, especially when they don't reveal it to you. When they
Mhm.
don't talk about it. I mean, some parents maybe overshare, but
Right.
and tell you everything, but like, in Baldwin's case, his dad didn't say anything, and so it's easy to just kind of treat him as that stone wall because that's how he is. And it's not
Mhm.
to say that they didn't have fun and they could joke around, but in
Yeah.
terms of like the emotion part of it, that really was like one of the few times I think we actually cut it out of the film that you and your brother had commented. I think your brother said that was the first time he saw your dad cry, and I think you said you saw the only other time was when your grandmother or great grandmother died,
Mhm.
which your brother wasn't born yet. So it makes sense. Like those two stories like match up, that this was like the most emotional moment of his father's life.
Yeah. And it's so wonderful that you were able to kind of pull that part of him out to share that, and that he could be so cathartic with it too, in the sharing of his story. Okay, so I don't want to give anything away, and I'm going to do my best to sidestep
Spoiler,
some spoilers. But have you ever, in your continued research of your family, figured out how and why they particularly got to Mississippi from, you know,
We can
your
say from
great
San
grandfather,
Right.
you know, and
Yeah,
how
we actually
How he
do
ended
you
up over
know that, like how he
Uh-huh.
or why he chose?
we do know
or-
now.
Okay.
We actually
Yeah, it's not
originally
really in
had
the
it.
film,
We
but-
had originally planned for it to be in the film, but we were going to actually have this map, because when we went to the National Archives, which is shown at the end of the film,
Uh-huh.
part of the documents, actually, there's these things called interrogations, where anyone that was Chinese that left the US or came back into the country, had to be interrogated. This is part of the Chinese Exclusion Act, because they wanted to make sure, like, you were here, you weren't going to take jobs away, you were not a laborer, and you were here legally. And so they had to go through these like intensive interviews. Sometimes they lasted like 2 weeks. Sometimes they lasted like in an
Months.
extreme case, it was 2 years, one
years.
person.
Mhm.
It was basically they were detained until they could prove that they were legally able to be here. And so because of that, there's questions that get asked of his great grandfather every time he came in. Who is your father? You know, how did he get here? How did you get here? Where did you live after San Francisco? You know, where and then he actually had to name every single place that he worked. And as a result, we actually know he went from San Francisco to Baton Rouge and New Orleans, up to Memphis, and to several cities in Mississippi before settling down in Pace, Mississippi. So we understand it was for work. You know, that's what he said in his statements. You know, a cousin, really somebody that's maybe from his original home village in China, told him about an economic opportunity. Like, hey, there's jobs down here. There wasn't maybe anything up in San Francisco. Let's go down to, you know, Louisiana. You work there, work in a laundry there. And then eventually somebody probably told him, hey, go to Mississippi. There's some grocery stores there. There's some opportunity. Or somebody, I think in one case, there was a guy that he ended up partnering with in a store, but that guy ended up going back to China permanently. And then that's how his great grandfather ended up acquiring the store. So
that was my next question so how did he get the store? If it was something that he bought from someone or started together?
It was like a partnership.
Right. Yeah. Somebody, that's what it sounded like, based on, and we're deducing this based on like the documents that we found, that he had a partner. And actually, I think he's explicitly said in the documents that that guy decided to move back to China and never come back. And so now the store was his. Yeah.
And I want to, because just like questions that I had, your great grandmother never was able to come to America. Is that correct? He would just go back and forth.
No, my great grandmother did eventually make it to Mississippi. So she's
did.
the one that they call Ms. Lou.
She's the one with the bound feet.
She's the one with the bound feet.
My grandmother never made it.
Your grandmother never made it.
Never made it. My grandmother and my aunt were, because they're women basically, were not able to come into the United States.
And the reason for your father coming to the States?
Yeah, so my father was eventually able to come over to the States because my grandfather and great grandfather had both passed away in Mississippi. And then my great grandmother was left with the store. And so she couldn't manage the store by herself with her bound feet. So she went back to China and Hong Kong, and where my father was still there, because
yeah, and I think the story goes, according to his dad, I think after his grandfather passed away, and I know these like family trees, like if you're watching, you're like, what is going on?
Yeah, I need a map.
And then we have you know,
Sort of a
basically,
map.
and I think at some point somebody suggested putting it on our website because it is,
Yeah.
we tried all sorts of iterations of trying to explain this, and then you get bogged down into the details.
Yeah.
And it really needs to be like a class where we just point, you know,
Yeah. Like
but
this.
yeah, which doesn't
Yeah.
make for a very interesting documentary, but for a good like Q&A in the session. But
Yeah.
you know, the grandma, see, I can't even get it straight. Grandma couldn't come over, and then great grandma mom promised, I think, grandpa Casey Lou, like after he died, like, bring my son over, you know.
Got it.
I think
Okay.
I think it was in the works that they would have him come over when he was of age to be
Got
able to
it.
come over. When he was a child, and the
Okay.
parents, the mom, they couldn't come over.
And
And
that
so-
is that then when the senator got involved
Yes.
of bringing them
Yeah,
to
because
run the store because it's
Yeah.
economic
yes,
prosperity for his
and
community.
this is where it got a little complicated, because once his grandfather and great grandfather died, they didn't have like ties to the Mississippi anymore.
Mhm.
And because his great grandmother had left, she needed some help, you know, diplomatically to get that, and like they needed white signatures from
Mhm.
residents that said, hey, I know this woman, I know that they were intending to come back to the United States.
Mhm.
And so, you know, one woman that we met, Joan Walton, who's in our
Yeah.
film, we left the story out. Again, it gets a little bit into the weeds, but like she was saying, yeah, I remember like my mom had to sign a petition that said, yes, like, you know, we knew your grandfather,
them.
and he intended to bring his son and know the family. And so that's partly how they ended up, you know, getting back in, was needed the help of the senator to pass a special bill because his father fell outside what immigration at the time allowed to come in, because he was a minor. He was only 14 years old.
Mhm.
So minors could not come in, you know, unless they were brought in by their father, which he didn't have it.
Right.
It was very patriarchal back then.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
most of the citizenships or, you know, allowances for that were all for the father, but because his father was gone,
Right.
there, or even if he had a brother, the brother could have brought him, but because
Sure.
it was the great grandma who was trying to bring him in, she had no status at the time.
Got it.
So
okay. We are getting close to about an hour mark. Surprisingly how fast that goes. If Mr. Grayson doesn't have any questions, I do have one last question for you that I feel like is probably one of my favorite questions is, what's a question about either this film or your filmmaking process or you that you always wish someone asks you, but no one ever really does, or they don't get to it?
Oh.
You know, Mr. Grayson actually kind of asked it earlier, like about the story process, because I think that's at least from a filmmaker standpoint, like I was very deliberate, you know, and I think most people don't get to hear, they're more interested in the history, you know, and all that, and more about the revelations. And my editor and I just spent countless hours with Post-it notes, like trying to figure out what the best storyline, and we slice this and dice this film in so many different ways. And I have such a greater appreciation for documentary filmmakers, because it is hard work. And I joked, like, I'm just going to write a script next time and just shoot it from beginning to end the way I want. But I do have ideas for other documentary films, so I'll have to go through this process again.
Yeah.
I really appreciated your comment about rough cuts, like rough drafts. There's a rule I teach my students, and I adapted it from a book somewhere, that all rough drafts are crap, and that's okay. You know, when you write that first draft, it's gonna be hot garbage, and then you go and you go through and you work on it, and you mess with the ideas until you've got something that's not.
All right, C10, right?
Excuse me, I've got bus announcements going on.
Watch out. The buses are coming.
That's funny. Yeah. And I think the other thing that, you know, people don't realize is, like, you as a filmmaker, I mean, we're all creative, and, you know, I think everyone thinks their idea is the best idea since sliced bread, and it's the greatest thing, and you're going to knock it out of the park the first time around. And you have to, like, not be so precious, like, with your art and your work, you know, whether it's writing a paper or, you know, painting something, and in our case, making a documentary, that there were some things, like how I envisioned it from the beginning. I had a different opening scene, I had a different closing scene, and then through the development of it, a lot of that went out the window because it didn't fit the storytelling, or the audiences weren't responding in the way that I had hoped that they would respond. And so I had to go back to the drawing board and be willing to change. Right.
Yep.
Sorry, that's our daughter like getting a snack right now in case she
Oh,
hears
that's okay.
shuffling in the back. You have announcements at school. We
It's
have
fine.
we
a
understand.
daughter that's on.
It's the
break.
way of the world. You're good.
She's like, I want my lunch.
Me
This is
too.
all. This is live Zoom for everyone. That's exactly
She
how
wants
it
her
goes.
lunch.
If this were one of the days where my son actually came over to the school after he was done, he's in first grade, and so Mondays and Tuesdays he comes over. He comes over here, and I'll take him home. And so he loves to just pop right up here on camera. Hi, how's everyone doing?
Yeah.
Here we are again.
Second grade, and I'm surprised she hasn't done that
We
yet.
have a second grader, so like we're right there with you, right there with Callie. Please be quiet. We're still on. It's like the peanut gallery back here.
She's like heckling you guys in the background. She's like, this film
She
is
kind of
awful.
does. Her heckling game is actually pretty good.
That's fantastic. So Baldwin, do you have an answer to that question, or you're just gonna pass it off to?
I guess the question that I don't get too often, but which I don't mind if I do, is like because my history is really in music and hip hop, like for people to notice that one of my songs is in the film.
Yeah.
So every once in a while, people will be like, "Oh, is that your song?" But like I don't get that question too much. But
Well, you guys had to tell me, and then I went back to listen to it. I was like, "That is Baldwin. I can definitely tell."
Yeah.
Well, and my song is the end, and I'm a music artist, and that, my background is in as a singer, as a songwriter, and so my song is the end credit song.
Yeah.
So we did manage to slip in our music, and I have one other song that's just instrumental. That is one of my songs as well. That is in one of the scenes.
It was also easier to license that music.
I was
Yeah,
gonna say,
Yeah.
like,
people don't
sign
know
here and here.
Yeah.
that licensing music can get expensive, and we did license a couple of other artists like for our film, but when filmmakers don't understand even licensing footage, like there's a shot of the SS Cleveland that passes by for a few seconds. It's like a few $100s for me to get a few seconds of that ship passing by, but I was like, oh, but it's so cool, can I just
Yeah.
have that shot,
It was worth
please?
it. It was worth it.
It just makes it so visual to imagine what it was
Yeah.
like to be an immigrant sailing on that ship. So
Yeah.
Yes, it was totally worth it. So I appreciate
thank you.
that
Thank
couple
you.
$100 that you spent.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
exactly.
And then I guess my last question, unless Jim, you want to jump in, or other Jeanette. Jim has a student teacher whose also name is Jeanette, which is great. I
Hi,
always love
Jeanette.
meeting
Hi,
other
Jeanette.
Jeanettes. It's so great. Is what's next? What do you feel like next, besides maybe a little bit of rest and the tour and all these other things, putting educational stuff together, but thinking about another project, or
83 but 60.
do you want to get on the bus, or
There's the buses. I'll
Yeah.
tell you this, we don't have buses in our school district where our daughter goes. Like they just cut it, like the funding, they just
Oh.
cut it completely. So there's no school buses. Not that it matters now anyway, no one's going anywhere. But we have, well, first of all, I think we mentioned it earlier, our film is going to be airing on America Reframed PBS World Channel in
So
May.
awesome.
We're still not sure when the date is. And so if people are watching and they want to learn more about like those updates, go to our website, fareastdeepsouth.com, and follow us and subscribe to our newsletter. Follow us on social media. We are continuing to tour the film. Our main goal is to get the film into schools, middle school, high schools, universities all across the country, that it gets integrated into American history and not just an Asian American studies program.
So, Mr. Grayson, if you would like to get a DVD for your library,
I'll be speaking to our librarian about it tomorrow.
All right.
Yes, absolutely.
I
We'll send
already
you a
saw the
link.
price. We'll
He's
talk
already.
Oh, great. Awesome.
We'll talk about the purchase order.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Awesome. New Day Films is our educational distributor.
That really is our priority right now, is getting our film used in schools, so that we can just educate our students. We really feel like the students really are the future. It's just because of my daughters, because of your son and your students that we can't do anything about the history of our past. There's always dark history in the past of every country, and in America as well, obviously. But we don't have to let those things define our future. We have the opportunity to learn from the past. We have an opportunity to know what got us to where we are today, and then through that knowledge, we can create a better future. And I think our kids are going to be the ones that are going to be better suited at it. We got to start now with who we are right now, but I think our kids are going to be the ones that are going to be better suited to make the changes in the future. So education is our top priority right now.
Yeah, and we also host a podcast called Love Discovery and Dim Sum. If anybody's interested, podcast.loveanddiscovery.com is the website. But we're on Apple Podcasts and anywhere you could get podcasts. And we continue these conversations about little known history or issues of race, especially as it relates to current events, and giving some perspective that maybe people don't normally see, and discuss things in a friendly manner. Because I know sometimes the topic of race can get so contentious, and I think with our film and with our podcast, we really want to open these conversations in a friendly manner where we come together and bring people together and start with our commonalities rather than like always just screaming at our differences. And I think our country is in that moment where we're like, we have to stop being on opposite sides. Like we have to start talking to each other and start realizing that we do have more things in common than we have different. And no one's going to win if everybody's just sitting on opposite sides of a room all the time. And we've got some ideas from documentaries that hopefully we'll be revealing.
Well, and even just like, I feel education is educating people on art, on history, that things that you don't know about, that's totally just left out of, I didn't even know about the Japanese internment camps until I was in high school, and we read Fellware to Manzanar. And I was like, what? Like, I'm just now hearing about this. Like, we went through all of this American history and all this other stuff. And that was, I had no idea.
I didn't even get that. I didn't even get that in high school.
Well, and
So,
the only reason I did was because I had
it's like a little paragraph.
Yeah. Like,
it's like a small little sidebar, like a sentence or two.
It was sometimes. Like Pearl Harbor. Oh, we moved all these people to camps, and it's not a big deal. And then page 42, like moves on, which is so crazy to me. And the more that we can just continue to share things like the Asian Exclusion Act, and I just found out about that even before your film, but just a little, I was 34 years old before I even heard about it, that it's the more we can talk about them and share them, that we just become better people, I think, because we realize how ridiculous that whole.
Well, and we start recognizing each other's humanity, and we start building that, we start building the skill of empathy. It was shortly before you guys came on, and I was on with my students who were here, and just kind of setting up the film for them a little bit. And it's like, well, okay, we've got a Chinese American who goes looking into his past, doing what I like to call physical genealogy, and looking into his family's past, and he goes all the way to, and I just set it up for him, and of course they bit. They said China, like, no, Mississippi, and they're wait, what do you mean Mississippi?
Great setup.
And
so if you need Jim for your next tour, you just go ahead and but the reaction was there, and the kids had the surprise. I had the same surprise. I'm and I try to think of myself as reasonably cosmopolitan for small town Kentucky anyway. And I had the same surprise. I'm like, what and seeing the lady speaking with her with the very Mississippi accent. With the very Mississippi accent was still just a cognitive disconnect for me. And so that tells me that I have
right.
Yeah. Speaking of genealogy, your physical genealogy, I'm starting tomorrow. Roots Tech. If you go to rootstech.org, it's the world's largest genealogy conference. It starts tomorrow, and they went virtual for the first time.
It's free to register.
And it's the first time
anybody
it's
does
free.
Want to plunge into their genealogical history.
Yeah, and we're speaking. We have a speak.
It's all on demand.
It's all on demand. So we have a little, workshop.
We have a session called documenting underrepresented family stories, but it really applies to all family stories.
Yeah.
And so that's a great resource.
That's so awesome. And also a great just side note to support your local small town historical societies, because they keep those are the keepers of the stories when our older folks pass away and we don't get those stories anymore. So we're looking into starting a storytelling session through the Art Center to record some of those voices and partner with the Kentucky Communities Council. But people need to support those entities that are keeping the records and keeping the amazing Chinese Bible that they could have just been like, well, we don't know this person, and
toss it.
I mean, because that happens, if there's no somebody
to keep it,
if there's not
to
someone
recognize
to keep
that there's
it,
value.
then
Yeah.
then it's gone, and it's
One
destroyed.
person's trash is another archive's dream.
It's an archivist's
Archivist's dream.
dream. Like, we love that stuff, you know, we're like super nerd out on it. Well, thank you guys so much for taking the time. Again, I think the last time we talked for like almost 2 hours, which it felt like. I feel like you're just part of our family now, and we're so happy to be here and have you guys here. And we hope you come and visit when you can.
We
Yeah.
hope so
again
too. We would love
safely.
to.
And
We heard that there were Chinese in the Appalachians too. So
yeah, I'm still trying to figure that out. Jim may have some more information. Jeanette seems to be shaking her head. So I'm still on the hunt for some
Yeah.
good resources for you on that regard. And I was happy to share some of our musicians and storytellers too with you all. So it's been such a wonderful conversation. Thank you for making this film. Thank you for sharing your family with us too, because it feels like we're part of your family now as well. And can't wait to have you in our space again. So
Yeah,
Oh,
we'd
yeah.
love to.
For
We'd love to
real.
come there in person.
let's do
Yeah.
For
it.
real.
Yeah.
yeah, for real. Space for real.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks,
Yeah.
guys. Thank you so much. And we'll keep in touch for sure.
Thank you so
Thanks
much.
very much. I've enjoyed it.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.